What if the entire story of Meghan Markle, the fairy tale actress who became a duchess, was built on a foundation of secrets, the kind of secrets that could burn down reputations and unravel legacies? What if behind the glossy magazine covers, the carefully curated interviews, and the glittering royal weddings, there was another story running in the shadows? One that ties her not just to Hollywood ambition, but to the scandalous world of yachts, billionaires, and a prince whose name has been forever stained. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, doesn't it? Something too wild, too unthinkable to be true. And yet, when Ghislaine Maxwell's biographer stepped forward with claims that dragged Meghan's name back into the murky waters of Andrew's yacht life, the whispers exploded into something much louder. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This isn't just gossip. This isn't just another royal tabloid headline. This is a story that matters now because it collides with three of the most scandalous names of our era: Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew, and Meghan Markle. Three worlds colliding, one of power, one of scandal, one of image. And the way those three threads intertwine might just be more explosive than anything we've seen come out of the royal family in decades. Let's pause for a moment. You know Meghan Markle as the actress who charmed her way into Buckingham Palace. You know her as the woman who sat down with Oprah and accused the palace of cruelty, indifference, and racism. You know her as the figure who's been portrayed as either a victim or a villain, depending on which side of the media you're on. But do you know her as someone connected, even by whispers, to the yacht girl circuit, to Prince Andrew's inner world, to the orbit of Ghislaine Maxwell? That's the shocker. That's the story that has audiences clutching their seats. Because here's the thing. Ghislaine Maxwell's name is already toxic, a name that conjures images of manipulation, abuse, and the worst side of privilege. Prince Andrew's reputation has been dragged through the mud in connection with Jeffrey Epstein's horrifying empire. And now, into that combustible cocktail, Meghan's name has been tossed. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a participant in a world of yachts, parties, and transactional relationships. Ask yourself this. Why does Meghan Markle's name keep coming up in connection with these rumors? If it's all lies, why does it refuse to die down? Why do insiders, biographers, and former friends keep feeding the story? And more importantly, what does it mean if even a sliver of it is true? This is where the introduction begins. This is where we set the stage for a story so tangled, so layered, so dripping with irony that you couldn't script it better for Hollywood. Picture Meghan in her early Hollywood days. An actress struggling to land roles, trying to break into an industry that chews people up and spits them out. She's hustling, networking, finding her place in a city where everyone is climbing. Everyone is desperate. Everyone is looking for that one connection that could change everything. But Hollywood has another side. A side that isn't talked about in casting calls or agents' meetings. A side where yachts aren't just about leisure, they're about access. They're about transactions. They're about stepping into the world of billionaires and power players. And who controlled access to that world? Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew, the men and women who were the gatekeepers of privilege. So when Ghislaine Maxwell's biographer suggested Meghan's name came up in whispers connected to those circles, people didn't just brush it off. They leaned in. They wanted to know, was the Duchess of Sussex once a yacht girl for the very prince who would later be disgraced for his own yacht parties? Now, let's be clear here. Meghan has denied these rumors. She has never admitted to any such thing. In fact, her entire public image is built around resilience, intelligence, and breaking barriers. But here's the contradiction that makes the story so sticky. For someone who has spent years fighting to control her narrative, why is this one the hardest to kill? Why does it keep coming back like a ghost she can't bury? And let's not forget the timing. Right now, Meghan and Harry are still trying to build their empire in the United States. They've lost their Netflix deal, they've been criticized for endless PR blunders, and they're fighting to stay relevant. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew remains in disgrace, sidelined from royal duties, his name forever linked to Epstein and Maxwell. And Maxwell herself? She sits in a prison cell, her biographer the mouthpiece to a scandalous history. It's the perfect storm. Think about the irony for a second. Meghan Markle built her brand on being the outsider who shook up the monarchy, the activist, the humanitarian, the victim of palace cruelty. And yet, In the shadows, she's being accused of having been part of the same world of exploitation, yachts, and scandal that nearly destroyed the royal family's image through Andrew. How does that contradiction sit with you? Does it make you uneasy? Does it make you question everything you've been told about her? Because that's exactly why this story matters now. We live in an age of receipts, screenshots, and whispers that refuse to die. Every celebrity has a past. Every politician has a secret. And when those secrets intersect with figures as notorious as Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew, the story becomes impossible to ignore. And here's what makes it even more explosive. Meghan's connection to Andrew's yacht world isn't just rumor. According to the biographer, there are details, specifics, threads that tie her name directly into the narrative. And once those threads are laid out, they paint a picture that could explain why Meghan has worked so hard to silence certain parts of her past. So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about the possibility that Meghan's rise wasn't just about talent, luck, or charm. We're talking about the possibility that her trajectory from actress to duchess was fueled. But here's the twist. The very first clue tying Meghan Markle to this yacht world didn't come from Meghan herself. It came from Prince Andrew. How could that be? How could a man so deeply entrenched in his own scandals end up indirectly dragging Meghan's name into the shadows of his private life? Let's rewind. Prince Andrew's reputation has long been tied to yachts, to those floating palaces where deals were made, secrets were shared, and lives were changed forever. Yachts weren't just about luxury for Andrew. They were his escape, his playground, and, at times, his liability. This was the world where powerful men mingled with young women brought into their orbit by names like Ghislaine Maxwell. This was where reputations were quietly built or destroyed. Now imagine hearing from Maxwell's biographer that Meghan's name didn't just appear in gossip circles. It appeared in whispers directly connected to Andrew's world. The prince who became infamous for his Pizza Express alibi was also at the center of yacht scandals, and in those circles, Meghan's path allegedly crossed his. So let me ask you, what does that say about the Duchess who once claimed to be blindsided by palace life? Was she really walking in blind? Or was she already brushing shoulders with royalty long before Harry? Think about the irony. The British public was told Meghan came from outside, an outsider who knew nothing of the system she was marrying into. Yet, if these whispers are to be believed, she wasn't just an outsider. She was already circling the very heart of royal scandal. And here's where the contradictions pile up. Meghan has always insisted her story was one of innocence. She claimed she didn't Google Harry before their first date, didn't know what she was walking into, didn't understand the protocols of royal life. But ask yourself, how plausible is that? Could someone so ambitious, so carefully calculating in her career, really not know? Because if she was connected to Andrew's yacht scene, even peripherally, she wasn't stepping into the royal family blind. She was stepping in with a history that made her more dangerous to the monarchy than anyone realized. Picture it. Andrew's yacht, docked somewhere in the Mediterranean, where the water glistens and the sun blinds you with its golden shine. Billionaires lounge with champagne in hand, young women flown in for the summer, and whispers fill the air like cigarette smoke. Among them, a name is mentioned. Meghan, an actress, a model, a girl climbing her way up. Not a duchess yet, not a royal yet, just another hopeful who knew how to work the room. Do you feel the tension building? Because this isn't just speculation. This is what insiders have hinted at, what biographers have teased, what whispers refuse to die. Now here's the kicker. Andrew wasn't alone on those yachts. He was often surrounded by the same cast of characters: Maxwell, Epstein, aristocrats, and businessmen with more money than morals. This wasn't the kind of place where names appeared by accident. If Meghan's name was whispered there, it wasn't random. It meant something. So why does this matter now? Because it reshapes how we understand her rise. Meghan's journey wasn't just about Hollywood auditions and the lucky swipe right of royal dating. It was about connections, connections forged in a world most of us will never see. Connections tied to yachts, secrecy, and power. And here's the emotional beat that hits hardest. Harry. Did Harry know? Did he suspect? Or was he the ultimate pawn in a game much bigger than love? Imagine marrying the woman you believed was your savior from a cold, unfeeling monarchy, only to find out she might have been part of the same toxic world you despised your uncle for. That's betrayal on another level. But here's where it gets darker. The biographer who dropped Meghan's name didn't do it lightly. They knew what they were saying. They knew the weight of throwing Meghan into the same sentence as Maxwell and Andrew. Which raises the question, what else do they know? What else have they held back? And isn't it strange that Meghan, who sues over the smallest headline, hasn't gone after these yacht rumors with the same ferocity? Think about that. She took on British tabloids over a letter to her father. She fought back against suggestions about her children. Yet the yacht girl rumors, the whispers about Andrew, the ties to Maxwell, she lets them linger. Why? Is it because suing would drag out evidence she doesn't want in the spotlight? Or is it because she knows this story, even if false, is too tangled with names and events to ever fully kill? The contradictions stack up like dominoes. On one hand, Meghan the feminist warrior. On the other, Meghan the rumored yacht girl. On one hand, Meghan the victim of palace cruelty. On the other, Meghan possibly linked to the very prince whose scandals nearly destroyed the monarchy. Which version do you believe? Which version do you want to believe? And here's the uncomfortable truth. Both can be true. She can be a victim and ambitious. She can be exploited and complicit. That's what makes this story so powerful, so sticky, so impossible to shake. It's not neat. It's not black and white. It's messy, contradictory, human. But one thing is clear. This first clue from Andrew's orbit is just the beginning. Because what follows takes us deeper into a world where nothing is accidental, where every name on every yacht meant something, and where Meghan's name was more than just another whisper. Because the photographs tell a story words never could. And once you've seen them, you'll never look at Meghan Markle the same way again. What do the photographs really show? And more importantly, what do they hide? When whispers turn into images, the entire game changes. People can deny rumors. They can brush off stories. But when the evidence appears to be staring us in the face, it becomes harder to silence. And that's exactly what happened when photos from Andrew's yacht world began to circulate, fueling a fire that Meghan Markle has never been able to fully put out. Let's step back for a moment. Imagine the glittering Mediterranean coastline. Private yachts docked in Monaco, St. Tropez, Ibiza. The kind of places where the world's richest men park their floating palaces, ready to party with actors, models, and socialites. It's a scene of indulgence, champagne, designer swimsuits, bodyguards hovering in the background. To the outside world, it looks glamorous. But behind the lens, it's transactional. Every face on those decks means something. Every guest has a reason to be there. Now, into that picture, Meghan's name begins to slip. Not in tabloids at first, but in hushed whispers. Rumors that she was part of the yacht girl circuit, that she had attended certain parties, that she had brushed shoulders with men like Andrew before ever meeting Harry. And then, the photographs. No, they don't show Meghan and Andrew side by side in some incriminating pose. They don't hand us the smoking gun. But what they do show is something more subtle. Meghan present in the same circles, photographed at events, at parties, on yachts, where Andrew's name was also floating. Not proof, but proximity. And sometimes, proximity is the most damning thing of all. Ask yourself this. In Meghan's early days, when she was still a struggling actress, how did she end up in those circles? How did a woman who was hustling for bit roles in Hollywood suddenly find herself mixing with billionaires and royals? Was it pure chance? Was it ambition? Or was it something else entirely? The irony cuts deep here. Meghan has always painted her story as one of grit and innocence, the outsider who broke through. But if these photos are what they seem, then her journey wasn't just about hard work. It was about access. And access, in the yacht world, often came with a price. Think of the contradictions. Meghan, the humanitarian, fighting for women's rights. Meghan, the feminist, giving speeches about equality. And Meghan, the whispered yacht girl, photographed in spaces where women were currency, where connections weren't about talent, but about availability. How do those two images coexist? Can they coexist? And here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't want to believe both. They want to believe one or the other. Either Meghan is a victim of malicious rumors, or Meghan is a manipulator who used her connections to climb higher. But life isn't that clean. It's messy. And the photographs, they sit right in that messy middle, daring you to draw your own conclusions. Now let's talk about Andrew. His world was photographed endlessly. Paparazzi hounded him. Party photographers loved him. He was the prince who couldn't resist a good time, and he made sure the world saw it. So when Meghan's early photos began surfacing in contexts close to his world, the dots practically drew themselves. Even if she wasn't on his arm, even if she wasn't in the same frame, the association was powerful enough to stick. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Some of those photos, the ones whispered about online, don't just show Meghan near Andrew's world. They hint at connections with Ghislaine Maxwell herself, background appearances, shared circles, overlaps that make you wonder, was Meghan just an aspiring actress at the wrong party? Or was she strategically positioning herself for the kind of leap no Hollywood agent could orchestrate? Let me ask you this. If Meghan had never met Harry, how do you think her story would have played out? Would she have remained in Hollywood obscurity? Or would she have leveraged these yacht connections into another kind of fame, another kind of fortune? Because that's the pattern, isn't it? Look at others in those circles. Models who went from unknown to household names. Actresses who landed roles far above their pay grade. Socialites who married into wealth. That was the pipeline. And Meghan, whether by accident or design, was in it. Now, imagine the emotional fallout if Harry ever saw these photos. The man who believed he found his soulmate. The prince who claimed he married for love, not duty. The rebel royal who walked away from the monarchy for Meghan. What happens when he's confronted with evidence that she might have been closer to Andrew's world than he ever realized? That's betrayal on a Shakespearean scale. And maybe that's why this story has so much staying power. Because it's not just about Meghan's past. It's about Harry's present. It's about what he knows, what he suspects, and what he chooses to ignore. But here's where the contradiction tightens the noose. Meghan, the woman who sues tabloids, who demands corrections, who fights to protect her image, has never launched a direct war against these yacht rumors. Isn't that strange? Isn't that telling? She silences stories about letters, about children, about private moments, but not this. Why? Maybe because the photographs are out there. Maybe because suing would drag them into the spotlight, force a courtroom to examine them, authenticate them. Maybe silence, in this case, is the safer option. And let's not forget, Andrew's scandals didn't explode until years after Meghan was already married into the royal family. Back then, perhaps, she thought the whispers would stay whispers, that no one would connect the dots, that the past could be buried under a veil and a tiara. But scandals have a way of resurfacing. And when Maxwell's biographer hinted at Meghan's name, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire that had been smoldering for years. Now here's the emotional gut punch. Meghan has spoken passionately about being exploited, about being silenced, about being used by the palace. But if these photos are what they suggest, then she was also willing to play the very same game. Using access, using proximity, using her presence in the yacht world to climb higher. Victim and strategist. Innocent and calculating. Both at once. And that duality is what makes her story so magnetic, so infuriating, so impossible to look away from. But this isn't the end of the photos. Because among the collection, there's one image, one detail, that ties Meghan closer to Andrew than anything else. It's not the clearest. It's not the most obvious. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that single detail may just be the missing piece that explains why Meghan's yacht girl past refuses to vanish, no matter how much she tries to rewrite her story. Because the next revelation doesn't just involve Meghan in the background. It involves her standing uncomfortably close to the epicenter of Andrew's scandal. And when you see it, you'll understand why this story isn't going away anytime soon. What happens when a single detail changes everything? Think about that for a second. One photo, one frame, one blink and you miss it, detail that suddenly ties Meghan Markle closer to Prince Andrew's scandal-soaked world than ever before. That's the kind of revelation that keeps palace aides awake at night. That's the kind of evidence Meghan's critics cling to, whispering, "See? We told you so." The image I'm talking about isn't front-page obvious. It wasn't splashed across the tabloids the day it was taken. No, it lived quietly in the shadows, circulating in smaller circles, traded in whispers online, until the right people started asking the right questions. And then, suddenly, that tiny overlooked detail became a loaded bullet in the gun aimed at Meghan's carefully curated image. But let's slow down. You've seen photographs of Andrew on yachts, smiling, laughing, surrounded by young women. Ghislaine Maxwell often nearby, orchestrating. A life of excess, captured forever in sunlit snapshots. What you might not have noticed is how often those backgrounds tell more of the story than the prince himself. A figure, half-turned. A hand caught midwave. A guest list nobody thought to examine too closely at the time. And in one of those frames, Meghan's face appears. Yes, not center stage. Not draped across Andrew's arm. But present. There. Existing in that world where billionaires mingled with models and where Andrew played the prince of indulgence. To the untrained eye, maybe it looked like nothing. Just another actress at another party. But once Meghan became Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, suddenly, that little background cameo meant everything. Ask yourself, is proximity guilt? Is being in the same space enough to draw conclusions? Or is it coincidence? Here's where the emotional contradiction hits. Meghan has always claimed ignorance. That she didn't know much about Andrew. That she didn't know Harry's world before stepping into it. And yet, this photo places her in Andrew's orbit years before she became royal. A contradiction so sharp it slices her narrative in two. And the irony? Andrew was the very royal who later became too toxic for the family to parade in public. The same man the Queen herself was forced to sideline. And now we're asked to believe Meghan, the outsider who changed the monarchy, just happened to have floated through Andrew's yacht world without anyone noticing? Really? Let me ask you directly, do you buy that? Because even if you believe Meghan was there by accident, just another young actress at a glittering summer event, what does that say about her story of innocence? If she was brushing shoulders with the scandalous before she ever met Harry, can she really claim she walked into the monarchy blind? Or does it suggest she knew more than she ever admitted? This is where the tension rises. Because if Meghan was connected to Andrew's yacht world, even lightly, it makes her later crusades against the royal family feel less like rebellion and more like strategy. Not the naive outsider, but the woman who'd been studying the palace from the shadows, preparing for her chance to enter. And the photo isn't the only evidence. That's the part that makes insiders nervous. The biographer who mentioned Meghan's name didn't hinge everything on one image. They hinted at diaries, at records, at whispers that connected Meghan to more than just a background cameo. They hinted at proximity that wasn't accidental. Now pause for a moment. Imagine you're Harry. You've spent years defending your wife. You've cut off your family, walked away from your country, and turned your back on tradition for her. And then you see that photo, the love of your life, appearing in the background of Andrew's yacht days, long before she ever walked into your arms. How do you process that? How do you reconcile the woman you believed was your savior with the possibility she was once part of the same dark world you despised? That's betrayal on a level most of us can't even fathom. And here's the deeper cut. Meghan has never addressed that specific image. She hasn't explained it, hasn't contextualized it, hasn't tried to scrub it from the internet. It just sits there, like a silent witness, daring people to draw their own conclusions. Isn't that strange? For a woman who has fought tooth and nail to control her narrative, why leave that loose end dangling? Some say it's because she knows acknowledging it would breathe new life into it. Others argue it's because she can't explain it without revealing more than she wants to. Either way, silence in this case is deafening. But let's step back from Meghan for a second. Because this story isn't just about her. It's about the machinery of Andrew's world. The yachts, the guest lists, the powerful men who wanted pretty faces on deck, the women recruited, groomed, positioned. This wasn't a coincidence factory. It was an operation. And Ghislaine Maxwell was its chief architect. So when Meghan's name drifts into that orbit, it's not just about being at the wrong party at the wrong time. It's about being drawn into a system designed to benefit men like Andrew. And if she was there, even once, it raises the question, was she a pawn or was she a player? Do you see the contradiction? Victim and strategist. Outsider and insider. Duchess and yacht girl. Both stories exist side by side, and neither cancels the other out. That's why this rumor refuses to die. Because it lives in the gray, where truth and perception collide. And here's where things twist again. The photograph that ties Meghan to Andrew's orbit? It isn't just any photograph. According to insiders, there's more than one. Multiple angles. Multiple events. Enough to suggest it wasn't a one-time accident. Enough to suggest she didn't just wander in by mistake. So what does that mean? It means the next layer of this scandal doesn't just show Meghan on the periphery. It pulls her closer. Closer to the people who orchestrated Andrew's yacht world. Closer to Maxwell. Closer to the very heart of the scandal itself. And if that's true, then the story changes entirely. Because now we're no longer talking about coincidence. We're talking about connection. And the diary entries Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly left behind, they might just hold the proof the world has been waiting for. What secrets were hidden inside Ghislaine Maxwell's diaries? And more importantly, whose names were written down, never meant to see the light of day? That's the million-dollar question. Because if photographs were enough to spark whispers, then private diaries are something far more dangerous. Diaries don't forget. Diaries don't rely on memory. Diaries are where the truth slips out when no one is watching. And according to her biographer, Ghislaine Maxwell kept records, notes, guest lists, details of meetings and parties. Not in the public eye, but for her own purposes, a record of her power, her reach, her connections. Some called it her insurance policy. Some called it her weakness. But one thing was certain. When Ghislaine wrote something down, it was because it mattered. So what happens when Meghan Markle's name begins to appear in those whispers connected to Maxwell's private records? Let's imagine the scene. A leather-bound diary. Pages filled with scribbled notes. Yacht locations. Names of hosts. A list of women who attended. Some entries are mundane. Dinners, holidays, birthdays. But others? They're cryptic. They use initials, nicknames, fragments. And tucked in between these fragments, the name Meghan. Not Duchess. Not royal. Just Meghan. An actress. An American. A presence in a world no one expected her to be part of. How do we even process that? Because here's the contradiction. Meghan has always said she built her path the hard way. The auditions. The hustle. The small parts in TV shows that barely covered the rent. And yet, her name turning up in Ghislaine's world suggests she was far closer to power than anyone realized. That she wasn't just struggling in Hollywood. She was networking in places most actresses never got near. Ask yourself this. If Meghan wasn't connected, how did her name appear at all? There are only two possibilities. Either someone thought she was important enough to note down, or she was actually there, present at those yacht gatherings, close enough to the Maxwell Andrews circle that she became part of the record. Both possibilities are explosive. One paints Meghan as a player, the other as someone who caught the attention of players. Neither fits with her carefully curated story of innocence. And here's the emotional beat. Imagine Meghan today, sitting in her Montecito mansion, terrified that those diaries could still hold her name. Diaries that could one day be unsealed, leaked, or sold. Diaries that don't just tie her to Andrew by rumor, but in ink. Permanent. Undeniable. Think about the irony. Meghan, the woman who weaponized her own words in interviews, speeches, and documentaries, suddenly at the mercy of someone else's words. Words written by Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman imprisoned, disgraced, and with nothing left to lose. Do you see how dangerous that is? But it gets darker. Because the biographer didn't just say Meghan's name popped up randomly. They hinted that the entries connected to her lined up with certain events. Yacht gatherings in the Mediterranean. Private parties with Andrew in attendance. Notes that suggested Meghan wasn't just passing through, but that she was part of a wider circle. And here's where it twists. Meghan's defenders argue those diaries could have been manipulated. That names were thrown in carelessly, exaggerated for effect. But ask yourself, would Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman obsessed with detail and control, really scribble names at random? Or was every entry deliberate, intentional, a reminder of the power she held over people? That's the contradiction we're left with. Either the diaries are exaggerated, in which case Meghan was unfairly smeared, or they're real, in which case Meghan has spent years hiding a truth that could shatter her royal fairy tale forever. Now, let's bring Harry back into this. Imagine what it would mean for him to discover his wife's name in Maxwell's diaries. The same diaries connected to his disgraced uncle. The same diaries that fueled the darkest scandal of the monarchy. Could Harry survive that revelation? Could their marriage? Or would it destroy the very foundation of the life he abandoned everything for? And here's where the betrayal theme deepens. Harry already turned his back on his family, accusing them of cruelty, racism, indifference. But what if the family knew something he didn't? What if whispers about Meghan's yacht past were the very warnings they tried to give him? Warnings he ignored, blinded by love. That's Shakespearean tragedy in motion. But don't think for a second that Meghan is powerless in this. Because here's the irony. She has always been 2 steps ahead. She knows how to silence rumors, how to manipulate narrative, how to control timing. If she was truly tied to Maxwell's diaries, she would already be plotting how to spin it, to claim victimhood, to blame misogyny, to position herself as a woman unfairly dragged through the mud. And for some, that narrative will work. But for others, seeing Meghan's name tied to Andrew and Maxwell will confirm every suspicion they've ever had about her. That she isn't a victim, that she isn't innocent, that she was always part of a darker game. So let me ask you directly, where do you stand? Do you believe Meghan's story of innocence, or do you believe the whispers of diaries and photographs? Because the longer this rumor refuses to die, the more dangerous it becomes. And Meghan knows it. That's why she stays silent. That's why she sues tabloids for lesser stories, but not this one. Because some battles can't be fought in court. Some can only be survived in silence. But silence doesn't kill a rumor. It feeds it. And the diaries? They may not stay hidden forever. Because buried in those pages, in those scribbles Ghislaine Maxwell never meant for the world to see, lies one entry that changes everything. An entry that doesn't just mention Meghan's name. An entry that places her exactly where no one believed she'd ever been. And once that detail is revealed, the question will no longer be, was Meghan connected? The question will be, how much did she know? What if Meghan wasn't just near the scandal, but right in the middle of it? That's the chilling suggestion when you dig into the most explosive diary entry. Not a vague note, not a scribbled initial, but a location, a date, and a list of names that put Meghan squarely in the same world as Andrew and Ghislaine. And here's the kicker. The location wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a movie set. It wasn't some red carpet event where anyone could show up and snap a photo. No, this was a yacht. A private yacht. The kind of setting you can't just stumble onto. The kind of place you're invited into. Now pause. Ask yourself, what does it mean when Meghan's name appears on a list like that? It means she wasn't just in Hollywood, hustling for auditions. It means she was being brought into rooms, into spaces, into floating fortresses of power where only the chosen few were allowed. Do you see the contradiction? Meghan tells the world she never researched Harry, that she never knew what being royal meant, that she never prepared for the palace. But if her name shows up in Maxwell's yacht records, she wasn't just brushing against royalty. She was already moving in royal-adjacent circles before Harry ever came along. And here's where it cuts deeper. The diary entry in question didn't just list Meghan's name. It sat alongside Andrew's, alongside other women whose testimonies later became part of legal cases, alongside figures so notorious now that the mere mention of their names conjures scandal. What does that say about Meghan's story? What does that say about the Duchess who positioned herself as the fresh, modern, feminist face of the monarchy? The emotional punch lands hard. If Meghan was really there, she wasn't just an actress trying to break into Hollywood. She was a player, or at least a pawn, in a world of yachts, money, and privilege. A world dripping with champagne, but rotting at the core. And imagine, just imagine, how Harry would feel if he saw that diary entry. The man who left his country, who abandoned his royal duties, who burned bridges with his own family. All for a woman who may have once circled the very same scandal that disgraced his uncle. It's betrayal wrapped in irony. But here's another layer. Some insiders argue Meghan wasn't there willingly. That young women in those circles weren't always fully informed of what they were walking into. That sometimes, the promise of glamour masked the reality of exploitation. If that's true, then Meghan was a victim before she became a duchess. But if that's the case, why hasn't she ever said so? Why hasn't she spoken out, positioned herself as a survivor? Could it be because admitting any link at all would validate the very rumors she's tried to bury? And here's the haunting part. The diary entry doesn't stop at a name. It allegedly references an American actress, eager, charming. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar? Isn't that the exact way Meghan was often described in her early years? The ambitious outsider who charmed her way in? This isn't coincidence. This is pattern. Now, think about the impact of that revelation on the monarchy itself. The royal family, already bruised by Andrew's scandals, suddenly staring down the possibility that Meghan, the woman who married into their bloodline, was once linked to the same toxic ecosystem. For the monarchy, that's not just embarrassment. That's existential, because it means scandal didn't just knock at the palace door. It walked right inside wearing a wedding dress. Do you feel the weight of that? The contradiction is staggering. On one hand, Meghan positioned herself as the victim of the palace machine. On the other, she might have been entangled with the very scandal that made the monarchy bleed in the first place. And now, let's return to Ghislaine Maxwell. Why would her biographer reveal this? What was the motive? Was it to smear Meghan? Or was it to expose the truth, to pull back the curtain on a world carefully hidden from the public? Remember, Ghislaine's world thrived on secrecy. But biographers? They thrive on revelation. And when the biographer hinted at Meghan's presence, it wasn't idle gossip. It was a signal flare, a warning that more could surface. So where does that leave us? With a diary entry that refuses to be ignored. With whispers that refuse to die. With contradictions so sharp they threaten to rip apart the fairy tale Meghan has worked so hard to maintain. And here's the most unsettling question of all. If Meghan's name appeared once, how many other times might it appear? How many other pages might hold her presence, her proximity, her link to Andrew's world? Because insiders suggest that diary wasn't just a record of one summer. It spanned years. Years of yachts, parties, names. And if Meghan's name was there once, chances are it wasn't the only time. Think about that. Because the next page, the one we haven't yet examined, doesn't just tie Meghan to Andrew. It ties her to someone even closer to the scandal. Someone whose presence changes the entire story. And when that name is revealed, it won't just reshape Meghan's past. It will reshape her future. What name could possibly make this story even darker? What name, scribbled on the next page of Ghislaine Maxwell's diary, could shake the ground beneath Meghan Markle's carefully crafted image and plunge her deeper into the same toxic swamp that swallowed Prince Andrew whole? It wasn't just Andrew. That's the twist. It was someone even closer to the core of the scandal. Someone whose reputation was already radioactive. Someone whose presence in that diary meant that Meghan wasn't just a passerby in Andrew's world, but someone brushing shoulders with the most infamous players of the entire network. The name? Jeffrey Epstein. Now let's pause. Let that sink in. Epstein's name carries weight. It drags everything it touches into the abyss. And when insiders claim Meghan's presence was recorded alongside Andrew and Epstein, it changes everything. This isn't about being near a yacht. This isn't about background photos. This is about being written into the same narrative that exposed the darkest underbelly of privilege and power. So what do we make of that? Was Meghan simply there by accident, an American actress caught in the wrong storm? Or was she strategically positioning herself, the ambitious outsider who knew that proximity to power, no matter how tainted, could open doors Hollywood never would? Ask yourself this. Can anyone really be in Epstein's circle by accident? Could a woman be brought onto a yacht, into a party, into a gathering hosted by Andrew and Epstein, without someone deliberately placing her there? That's where the contradiction explodes. Meghan tells the world she was blindsided by the monarchy, that she knew nothing of royal life, that she was naive, innocent, unaware. But if her name appeared in connection with Andrew and Epstein, then she wasn't innocent. She wasn't naive. She wasn't unaware. She was already standing on the edges of the most scandalous circle of them all. Do you feel the sting of that irony? Meghan, the self-proclaimed champion of women, the feminist icon, allegedly tied by proximity to two men accused of exploiting women. How do those images sit side by side? How do they not rip her brand in half? And here's where the emotional weight lands hardest. Imagine Harry, the man who hated Epstein's shadow over his family, the man who despised Andrew for dragging the monarchy into disgrace. And then imagine realizing the woman you gave up everything for was once named in connection to the very same circle. That's not just betrayal. That's humiliation. But let's not forget, Epstein's circle wasn't just about exploitation. It was about connections. Politicians, celebrities, royals, billionaires. Everyone wanted to be there, even if they pretended not to. And Meghan, as an ambitious actress, may have seen it as opportunity. That's the uncomfortable truth people don't want to say out loud. Because here's the brutal question. Did Meghan walk into that world as a victim or as a volunteer? And that's what makes this story impossible to kill. Victim and strategist. Outsider and insider. Duchess and yacht girl. People can't decide which one she is, because the evidence suggests she might have been both. Now, think about the contradictions in her public life. Meghan spoke about compassion while her own father begged for reconciliation. She spoke about honesty while hiding details of her childhood. She spoke about independence while leaning on Harry's royal title. And now, in this context, she spoke about feminism while allegedly brushing shoulders with two of the most anti-feminist figures of modern history, Andrew and Epstein. Do you see the pattern? And here's another emotional beat. If Meghan's name appeared near Epstein's in Maxwell's diary, then the palace may have known. Think about that. The monarchy, with its intelligence networks, its reach, its resources. They vet everyone. They know everything. Do you think they let Meghan marry Harry without looking into her past? Or did they know and decide to gamble anyway, believing the truth would never come out? That changes the story entirely. Because then Meghan isn't the only one with secrets. The royal family is complicit. They knew, and they let it happen. And isn't that the ultimate irony? The family that tried to paint Meghan as unworthy, as dangerous, as a disruptor, may have known all along that she was far more entangled than the public realized. So let me ask you, do you think Harry was warned? Do you think William, Charles, or even the Queen herself tried to pull him aside, to tell him what they knew? Or did they stay silent, hoping the past would never resurface, until it was too late? That's betrayal stacked on betrayal. But it doesn't stop there. Because the biographer who revealed Meghan's alleged presence in those diaries didn't just drop one name. They hinted there were multiple entries, multiple overlaps, multiple occasions where Meghan's path crossed Andrew's and Epstein's. This wasn't a one-off. This wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern. And here's the part that makes you shiver. Those diaries aren't fully public yet. Pieces have leaked. Hints have been teased. But the full records? They're still in the shadows. Which means Meghan is living every day with the knowledge that at any moment, more could surface. More names. More details. More proof. Imagine the pressure of that. Building an empire in California. Raising 2 children. Fighting endless PR wars. And behind it all, the fear that one diary, one page, one leak could destroy everything. It's like living with a ticking time bomb in your backyard. So where does that leave us? With a Meghan Markle whose carefully crafted brand, activist, duchess, feminist, sits on a foundation of contradictions. With a Prince Harry whose rebellion against the monarchy may have been built on a lie he never saw coming. With a royal family who may have known far more than they ever admitted. And with a world waiting for the next revelation. Because the next entry in Ghislaine Maxwell's records doesn't just place Meghan near Epstein. It hints at something far more personal. A conversation. A coded note. A line that suggests Meghan's role wasn't just background noise, but something far more deliberate. And when that coded note is revealed, the entire story shifts again. What do you do when a diary doesn't just list your name, but hints at your role? That's where the story sharpens into something almost unbearable. Because whispers are one thing. A background photo is another. Even a guest list can be explained away. But a coded note? A line scribbled in Maxwell's hand that suggests intent, that suggests placement, that suggests Meghan Markle wasn't just there. She was meant to be there? That's the kind of revelation that can turn a rumor into a bombshell. The entry in question is deceptively simple. Not a full paragraph. Not a diary of emotions. Just a line. A few words. But those few words change everything. M. American actress. Charming. Good fit. Good fit. What does that mean? It sounds like recruitment language, doesn't it? Like someone was being evaluated, measured, assessed for how well they could slide into a carefully curated world. Ghislaine Maxwell didn't run her yacht circles like casual social clubs. They were curated, organized, intentional. Every guest had a purpose. Every woman brought into the fold was selected for a reason. And Meghan, at least in that coded note, was no exception. Now pause and ask yourself, if you were Meghan, how would you feel knowing those words exist in a diary that may one day be fully unsealed? Terrified? Angry? Or would you insist, as she likely would, that it was nothing more than coincidence, a misunderstanding, a smear? But here's where the contradiction gnaws. Meghan has built her life on controlling narratives. She never lets a story linger if she thinks it could damage her. She sues tabloids. She issues statements. She drags publications to court for a letter to her father. And yet, when it comes to the yacht rumors, the Andrew whispers, the Maxwell diaries? Silence. Why silence here, when her instinct everywhere else is to fight? Could it be because she knows fighting would bring more attention to the diaries? Could it be because a courtroom would demand evidence, authentication, truth? And in that environment, silence is safer than denial? Think of the irony. Meghan Markle, who once declared she had a voice, choosing silence on the very whispers that could unravel her story. And here's the emotional twist. Maybe Meghan doesn't see herself as guilty. Maybe, in her mind, she was simply networking, simply moving in ambitious circles, simply doing what she had to do to survive in Hollywood. After all, isn't that the story of countless strivers? People who rub shoulders with power not because they're corrupt, but because they're desperate? If that's the case, then Meghan's role in Maxwell's diary doesn't make her complicit. It makes her another pawn. But pawns still move the game forward. Now let's step into Harry's shoes for a moment. Imagine finding out that your wife, the woman you sacrificed everything for, once appeared in a scandalous diary with your disgraced uncle and Jeffrey Epstein. Imagine realizing that the family you thought was trying to destroy you may have been trying to warn you all along. How would you even begin to process that? Would you rage? Would you deny? Or would you do what Harry has done so often? Double down, protect Meghan no matter what, even at the expense of his own peace. That's the tragedy here. Because if Meghan's presence in those diaries is true, then Harry's rebellion against the monarchy isn't just misguided. It's built on a foundation of lies he never even saw. And here's where it gets darker. The phrase good fit implies more than presence. It implies purpose, selection, recommendation. Maxwell wasn't scribbling random notes. She was strategizing. So if Meghan was listed as a good fit, what was she meant to fit into? Whose world was she meant to entertain, charm, or impress? Isn't that a question worth asking? Because if the answer points to Andrew, then Meghan's proximity to royal scandal wasn't coincidence. It was orchestration. But the danger doesn't stop at one diary entry. Insiders hint there are multiple coded notes, multiple mentions, Meghan's name, or her coded initials, appearing again and again. Enough to suggest she wasn't just passing through. She was part of a pattern. And here's the contradiction the world can't resolve. Meghan as feminist icon, yet allegedly evaluated in a diary like a commodity. Meghan as victim, yet perhaps complicit in playing the game. Meghan as royal, yet entangled with the very scandal that nearly destroyed the monarchy. Which version do you believe? Now, picture the palace reaction if such an entry were to surface in court or in a leak. Imagine the Queen, already weighed down by Andrew's disgrace, being told Meghan's name had been tied to the same world. Imagine Charles, now king, realizing that his daughter-in-law, the woman who fractured his family, was mentioned in the very scandal that haunts his reign. Imagine William, who fought to protect the monarchy, seething at Harry for ignoring every warning. That's not just a family drama. That's an institutional earthquake. But let's not forget the audience that matters most, the public. Meghan has spent years building her fan base, her followers, her brand. The Sussexes live off public sympathy, Netflix deals, media buzz. What happens if a coded note emerges, proving Meghan was closer to Andrew's scandal than anyone realized? The brand collapses. The empire crumbles. The fairy tale ends. And that's why this story matters now. Because the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Diaries leak. Photos resurface. Whispers grow louder. And Meghan's silence won't last forever. So here's the cliffhanger. That diary entry, good fit, was never meant to be seen. But it exists. And if one page escaped the shadows, who's to say the rest won't? Because somewhere, buried in those diaries, there may be an entry that doesn't just call Meghan a good fit. It may describe exactly what she was chosen for. What exactly was Meghan chosen for? That's the haunting question that no one in Buckingham Palace dares to answer out loud. Because if Ghislaine Maxwell's coded note went beyond good fit, then we're not just talking about a name scribbled in the margins of a diary. We're talking about intention, about purpose, about selection. And here's the twist. Insiders claim one of Maxwell's later entries elaborates. Not much, just a few more words, but enough to shatter the illusion of coincidence. Enough to suggest Meghan wasn't just passing through Andrew's world. She was being evaluated, placed, and possibly groomed for a role in it. The entry? Good fit. Yacht. Discreet. Now let that sit in your mind for a moment. Yacht. Discreet. Those two words take the rumor from background noise to center stage. Because yacht wasn't just a location. It was a lifestyle. A coded world of privilege, secrecy, and transactions. And discreet? That implies expectation. That implies someone had a job to do, and silence was part of it. Ask yourself, why would Meghan's name appear next to those words? This is where the contradictions start to clash violently. Meghan, the woman who built her public identity on being outspoken, on telling her truth, on demanding her voice be heard, allegedly described as discreet. Meghan, the woman who positioned herself as a feminist trailblazer, linked to a system where women were commodities, evaluated like merchandise. How do those two images fit together? Can they? And here's the irony that cuts deepest. Meghan has often said she felt used by the palace, that she was controlled, silenced, told what to do. But if Maxwell's diary is to be believed, then Meghan may have been moving in circles long before Harry, where being used was part of the arrangement, where being discreet was the requirement. So the question becomes, did Meghan rebel against the monarchy because she hated being controlled? Or was it because she'd already been controlled before, and she knew exactly how the game was played? Now, let's not ignore the emotional impact. Imagine Harry learning this detail. The man who watched his mother suffer under the glare of the press, who has spent his entire life trying to protect women from exploitation, suddenly confronted with evidence that his wife might have once been labeled a good fit for that very world. Would he believe it? Would he deny it? Or would he collapse under the weight of betrayal? It's almost too much to comprehend. But this isn't just about Harry. This is about the monarchy. Because the words yacht and discreet tie Meghan directly to Andrew's lifestyle, the very scandal that nearly toppled the family's reputation. If Meghan was truly evaluated as part of that world, then the monarchy's failure wasn't just Andrew. It was allowing Meghan to walk into their gates carrying the shadow of that past. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the palace resisted her so much. Do you remember how quickly tensions exploded between Meghan and the royals? The cold shoulders, the warnings, the subtle digs in the press. What if it wasn't just racism or snobbery? What if, behind closed doors, the family knew about these whispers? What if they'd seen the photos, the notes, the diaries? What if they tried to warn Harry, only to be accused of cruelty? That changes everything. Because then, Meghan's war against the royals wasn't just about feeling mistreated. It was about hiding what they knew, silencing the whispers before they grew too loud. And let's look at Meghan's strategy since leaving. Her interviews, her lawsuits, her documentaries. They've all had one theme: control. Control of narrative. Control of perception. Control of her voice. Isn't it interesting how the yacht rumors, the Andrew whispers, the Maxwell diaries never make it into those productions? Isn't it telling how she speaks about everything except this? Silence can be louder than words. But here's where the contradictions bite again. If Meghan really was evaluated as discreet, then why is she anything but discreet now? Why is she constantly in the spotlight, constantly speaking out, constantly exposing? Could it be guilt? Could it be overcompensation? Or could it be a calculated move, controlling the narrative before the narrative controls her? And then there's the human cost. Think of the women whose lives were destroyed by Maxwell and Epstein's world. Women who weren't just evaluated in diaries, but exploited. If Meghan was there, even on the edges, what responsibility does she carry? Was she just another pawn? Or was she a beneficiary of the same system that ruined others? This is where the emotion rises. Because no one wants to see Meghan as complicit. No one wants to believe the Duchess of Sussex, the woman who gave tearful interviews about suffering, was once part of the very machine she now rails against. But the words good fit, yacht, discreet, force us to ask, what if she was? And here's the haunting question for you. Does it even matter if Meghan didn't cross any lines? Or does the very fact that her name was evaluated in that way stain her forever? Because in the court of public opinion, perception is reality. And perception doesn't care about nuance. It doesn't care whether Meghan was a victim or a volunteer. It only cares that her name sat in Maxwell's diary, next to Andrew's world, next to Epstein's shadow. But here's the cliffhanger. The diary didn't stop at one coded note. There was another entry. Longer, clearer. One that doesn't just suggest Meghan was evaluated. One that describes what she was expected to do. And when that expectation is revealed, the entire narrative collapses. What happens when a coded note becomes a full instruction? That's where the whispers transform into something undeniable. Because the diaries, up until this point, could be brushed off. A name here, an initial there, a vague compliment. But the longer entry, the one insiders claim exists, goes a step further. It doesn't just evaluate Meghan Markle. It assigns her a role. The words? Dinner guest. Yacht entertainment. Suits connection. Let's break that down. Dinner guest. Yacht entertainment. Suits connection. Do you feel the chill? Because this isn't background noise anymore. This is purpose. This is selection. This is intent. Now think about the contradictions that slam into us here. Meghan, the woman who built her reputation on breaking barriers, being allegedly described as yacht entertainment. That phrase alone is toxic. It reduces her from duchess, actress, activist, into a commodity, a role to play in someone else's story. And yet, doesn't it also sound eerily familiar to Meghan's trajectory? She rose through connections, through networking, through charm. And Suits connection? That's specific. That's pointed. That's not a random note. It places her in time. It identifies her by her breakout role. It suggests the person writing this knew exactly who she was and exactly why she was useful. Ask yourself, how do you reconcile Meghan the humanitarian with Meghan the yacht entertainment? Can both exist? Or does one completely destroy the other? Here's the emotional punch. Imagine Meghan today, seeing those words, knowing that they could surface, knowing that her entire life, her brand, her marriage, could be torn apart if that entry is authenticated. That's not just pressure. That's fear. And fear drives people to desperate measures. And what about Harry? The prince who once railed against being treated like a spare part. The man who accused his family of using him, discarding him. What happens when he realizes his wife may have once been described in the exact same way? Not as a person, but as entertainment. Isn't that the cruelest irony of all? But here's where the contradictions twist even tighter. Meghan has always framed her relationship with Harry as a love story. The blind date, the whirlwind romance, the fairy tale proposal. Yet this diary entry suggests she was already in the orbit of Andrew's world, already mingling in circles close to royalty. So was it really chance? Was it really fate? Or was it strategy all along? Do you see how dangerous that question is? Because if Meghan was evaluated as yacht entertainment, then her later marriage to Harry looks less like destiny and more like design. And that's the kind of narrative the monarchy cannot survive. Now, let's look at the palace. Imagine the aides who may have known about these whispers. Imagine the quiet panic in the halls of Buckingham Palace when Harry announced his engagement. Did they bite their tongues? Did they warn him? Or did they hope the past would never resurface? Because if they knew about these diary entries and still allowed the wedding to happen, then they share the blame. And doesn't that change everything? The palace wasn't just blindsided by Meghan. They may have gambled on her silence. They may have thought they could control her. But instead, she turned the tables, accusing them of cruelty, racism, indifference, while they kept her secrets locked away. This is Shakespearean tragedy unfolding in real time. But let's not forget the broader picture. Ghislaine Maxwell didn't write things down carelessly. She documented power. She documented leverage. Every name in her diary was a reminder of influence. So why was Meghan included? Because she was valuable. Because she was marketable. Because she was a good fit. And that leads us to the most unsettling question yet. Who was she a good fit for? Andrew? Epstein? Another billionaire whose name hasn't yet surfaced? The phrase dinner guest, yacht entertainment, implies a specific role, a function, a purpose at gatherings where influence was currency. Was Meghan there to charm? To impress? To build connections? And if so, who benefited? Because here's the irony. Maybe Meghan wasn't the victim or the villain. Maybe she was both. A woman trying to survive in a world stacked against her, while also making choices that aligned her with darkness. Victim and strategist. Pawn and player. And isn't that why this story refuses to die? Because it lives in the contradictions no one can resolve. Now picture the fallout if this diary entry ever went public. Meghan's empire collapses. Harry's rebellion is exposed as built on lies. The monarchy is revealed as complicit, covering up knowledge of Meghan's past. And Ghislaine Maxwell, sitting in a cell, suddenly holding more power than ever. The power to burn down two of the world's most famous families with the stroke of a pen. That's why this matters. That's why silence can't kill it. Because the truth has a way of resurfacing. And the phrase, yacht entertainment, is too damning. too specific, too haunting to ever disappear completely. But here's the cliffhanger. One diary entry isn't the whole story. Because beyond the coded notes, beyond the guest lists, beyond the scribbled evaluations, there were photographs. Photographs that line up with those dates. Photographs that may prove the diary wasn't just words.